Unable to feature Carol Baker in An Ideal Place to Kill, Lenzi made up for it in 1972's Knife of Ice. Another fairly strong Giallo entry from Lenzi, although we're not really treated to anything new in the annals of cinematographic expression within the Giallo bracket, Lenzi's relatively, or sometimes outright satiating competence is it's interesting and kind of teasing to those who are more familiar with the genre than less familiar with the genre. I've inferred this before. Those who aren't familiar with the genre see just typical murder mystery, violent fluff. Whereas I think those more familiar with it, you see where someone who would have, a complete incompetence, like even less than Lenzi, where the meeting point is between something like of absolute incompetence versus something like Argento's Tenebrae. That's the appeal of Knife of Ice, is this kind of in between mode wherein a filmmaker's grasping at something very strong, although not ultimately creating a masterpiece, ultimately playing it relatively or a bit safe within the Giallo framework. Although it does contain a rather interesting twist ending wherein Carol Baker's character is possibly the more interesting she portrays in these films. Just going to read out background information associated with Knife of Ice now. The title takes its name from a quote attributed to Edgar Allan Poe, in which he refers to fear as a knife of ice which penetrates the senses down to the depth of conscience. The quote, however, was a fabrication by the filmmakers. Elements of the film's script and direction have been cited as being reminiscent of works by fellow Italian Lucio Fulci. Baker and director Umberto Lenzi had already collaborated in several films. Lenzi sought to write a screenplay featuring a notably different narrative, as the three previous films had largely centered around themes of greed and sexuality. The three previous films of Carol Baker. So the three previous Giallo, with the exception of An Ideal Place to Kill, aka Oasis of Fear, did not feature Baker. Lenzi initially considered directing Baker in a remake of the 1946 American horror film The Spiral Staircase, which also follows a mute woman stalked by a killer, but instead chose to write an original screenplay utilizing a similar plot device. Thematically, Lenzi stated, "It was a movie in which I attempted to blend all the elements of psychological distortion of my previous films with a little bit of horror." The character of Woody Mason, a deranged hippie Satanist who serves as a red herring in the plot, was loosely based on Charles Manson. The film's use of Satanists as initial suspects has been compared to Lucio Fulci's film Don't Torture a Duckling. Principal photography of Knife of Ice took place in Montseny in the Catalonia region of Spain. Because of the high altitude and frequent winds, the filming of sequences in the fog-filled streets proved difficult to shoot, as the wind carried away the fog produced by a fog machine. Visually, Lenzi was inspired by the shadowy cinematography of Jacques Tourneur's Cat People. However, Lenzi stated he was unable to fully realize the visual elements he sought, as the cinematographer, Jose F. Aguayo, I'm not pronouncing that perfectly, I'm sure, Jr., of which Il Coltello di Giaca, I'm trying to pronounce this in Italian just for fun, Il Coltello di Giaco was his first feature, often overlit the sets. That's a shame. To capture them, you'd need to capture the photography of Cat People, that early Jacques Tourneur. You need some. That's. I don't know if you can replicate that in color photography. It's very expressionistic in a manner that possibly could have only existed within the binary dimensions of black and white photography. More binary dimensions, I suppose. This is my perspective. That's my take for today. I Knife of Ice, one of Umberto Lenzi's better films, I could suggest. Yes.